Hello everyone and welcome back to Football Manager 2018 and this experiment where we're taking a look at what would happen if you gave a non-league team what at this point is about £3 or £4 billion. We have pumped a huge amount of money into the club and so far all we've got for that investment is a really disappointing yo-yoing between the Premier League and Championship. This is after the club managed to go all the way up into the Championship through consecutive promotions before then getting relegated twice in a year, before then bouncing their way back up into the Championship. And they are a top of the table Championship team, but they cannot hang on to Premier League status to save their life. 4 times they've been in the Premier League and 4 times they've been relegated. So last time out I was a little bit frustrated at how little the club had pushed forward. So what I decided to do was to put in a huge amount of money into the club once more, another £850 million or so, and I also decided to put their reputation back up to the maximum point. I'm not sure if that's reflected in this save that I've loaded up here, and as you can see the finances are where they were at the end of last episode, which is about £400 million, still a huge amount of money. And their reputation sitting at 6,451. I have put that reputation up into 10,000 ahead of going forward in time. I've also put the money up to £850 million, so they're at their maximum for just about everything. This will almost certainly be the last part of this experiment because I'm getting fed up of them not being successful with so much money. So I don't think they're going to go forward any further after this experiment. But if you guys hit that like button an awful lot, I mean, I think we'd need probably even over 500 likes just to force another part to this experiment because I'm so frustrated at the team. If there is appetite for another part, do let me know down below, but hopefully they'll win the Premier League or Champions League in this part and we will be able to put this experiment to bed. So let's go forward now 5 years in time with this new reputation, with this new money, and see if they can finally crack the Premier League and stay in there for more than one season. Well, we are now 5 years into the future, and as you can see, they have established themselves as a Premier League team. They have finally managed to do it. They got promoted in the 42-43 season, so that money really kicking in. That was the last season that we left off at, where they finished 3rd and failed to go up through the playoffs. The following season they actually dropped down to 13th, but that's because the new transfer budgets may not have been adjusted to the new reputation. They then did get promoted, winning the Championship, I think for the first time. I think they've had a couple of second place finishes and playoff promotions, but they'd never won the Championship before, so that would be almost their biggest honour other than the League Cup that I think they won a few years ago. But they then did secure Premier League status. They are declining though from 14th, 15th, 16th, and from the looks of it 17th, but we're in November 2047, so we've gone a bit too far ahead here. But it'll be interesting to see if they've achieved anything in the competitions as well, because as well as the Premier League, they'll also be establishing themselves more and more in the League Cup. We're up to the year 2047 now. We left off at the end of 2041, I think, maybe 2042. So that promotion did come quite quickly. If we have a look at their schedule for the senior squad, you can see they're currently managed by Højbjerg, which is quite funny. Their Premier League season is not going well right now. A lot of defeats in there. But if we drop back to the 42-43 season, I think is probably the best one. You can see their Championship season started off brilliantly. A lot of wins straight out of pre-season before a little rough patch before then getting back onto a winning streak, another poor patch before another winning streak, then another poor patch, another winning streak, and finally seeing the season out reasonably strongly with a lot of wins put together in a row. And it meant that in the Championship table for that season, you can see they won the league by a massive 10 points, nearly hitting that 100 points barrier. So doing a very good job returning to the Premier League at the first time of asking. And there is a very clear reason why they managed to do that. As a Championship club, they spent £277 million. That is outrageous. The previous season they spent 48 but sold 50. I mean, how do you even spend that much money? I mean, there's going to be financial fair play repercussions, surely, because they've got £46.5 million on this player from Leicester, bringing in players from Liverpool, Spartak Moscow, all sorts of players coming into the club from various different leagues. A massive strengthening, and I'm a little bit surprised they only won the league by 10 points, given they spent nearly £300 million. I mean, that's just outrageous, but that is what reputation does to a club in this game. It's boosted their ability to attract players and spend more money, even from the Championship, bringing in very, very good players to help them get further up the league. But unfortunately, you can already see as soon as they got to the Premier League, things started to fall apart. Several defeats there right at the start, including Preston, who they almost always seem to lose to. They did beat Watford and Spurs at home, and then had a little drawing patch, but they just could not get a win to save their life until this match with Chelsea, where they won 3-2, getting 3 goals in 36 minutes for a 3-1 lead, beating Chelsea and Arsenal in the FA Cup as well. A nice little win there. And then they started to really improve their results. There must have been a managerial turnaround at this point. It enabled them to stay in. Unfortunately, they were knocked out by Crystal Palace in the quarterfinals of the FA Cup, so not able to progress through any of the cup competitions, but doing very, very well up to that point. And it meant they did manage to stay in the Premier League. I think they finished about 14th that season from memory. And you can see this season their league got off in much better circumstance, even doing well in the Carabao Cup as well. A few defeats along the road, but mostly to the likes of Man United and Chelsea, Everton in there as well. But winning quite a few games, losing to City, even more wins here, and through in the Carabao Cup as well. They beat Everton 3-0 in the quarter-final, and then got past Tottenham over 2 legs in the semi-final. So could there be more cup success at Boston now that they've spent several £100 million? They're also through in the FA Cup, beating St Albans 3-0. But a really poor run of form here, facing some big teams before the Carabao Cup final. And they did win it. They beat Chelsea 2-0. Nicky Kemp with the goals, delivering another piece of silverware to the club in the 44-45 season. They were knocked out of the FA Cup. Their league form started to suffer. They got a few wins here, but a terrible end to the year when they had nothing really to play for with their position secure. But a really famous win there over Chelsea for 2-0. Hopefully putting them in the Europa League. We'll see on the next screen, but hopefully this time they will qualify for Europe, because last time they did it, they didn't meet financial fair play requirements, which meant they couldn't play in Europe. So let's quickly see if they managed to make it there. And you can see they did qualify for Europe. They had to go through a third qualifying round, beating Teplice 6-1 on aggregate. I don't even know where Teplice is. But they managed to put themselves into the fourth qualifying round against Rostov, where they actually won 4-0. Either side of a couple of 1-1 draws against difficult teams in the Premier League. Liverpool, Chelsea and Arsenal to start your season is quite difficult, but they did it unbeaten. And then got their Europa League campaign after a pretty good start with a 2-0 win against what I think is a Welsh side, TNS. Lost to West Ham, their first defeat of the season, coming quite far in, but through in the Carabao Cup. Lost to Hoffenheim, beat Galatasaray 4-0 away from home as well. That's a very good result. Through in the Carabao Cup again, 2-0 over Galatasaray, beating them home and away, 6-0 against the Welsh side, and losing to Hoffenheim 1-0, so probably just missing out on top spot in the group. But through in the quarterfinals of the Carabao Cup as well, so this is quite a big season for the team. But then the defeats started to come, 3 on the bounce there, and then draws with Liverpool, Chelsea, Liverpool again in the FA Cup, 2-0 defeat to United in the first round of the Carabao Cup semi-final, 3-1 win in the FA Cup replay though, taking them through, and beating United 2-1, but unfortunately too little too late, already knocked out and unable to defend their trophy, but still marching on in the FA Cup fourth round. And then in the knockout stages of the Europa League, you can see a 4-1 win over Ghent, 3-0 at home as well, but knocked out by Norwich in the FA Cup fifth round. In the next round against Villarreal, the second knockout round, they drew 1-1 at home, but then managed to win 1-0 away from home against Villarreal to go through to the next stage, where they placed Bilbao, beat them 3-1 away, and they must have been absolutely buzzing on that result, before then being crushed 3-0 at home and getting knocked out of the quarterfinal stage of a European competition. And it set off a terrible run of results there. It was a Leicester defeat really that caused it, and their morale plummeted and they absolutely fell apart at the end of the season. But a really good run there to make it all the way to the quarterfinals of the Europa League in their first appearance in European competition. The following season, no European football because they didn't qualify through any of the routes, and a really patchy form as well before some terrible, terrible form here between November and January, just not getting a single win on the books. before finally getting a few wins together, including in the FA Cup. They went through in the third round and in the quarterfinals, so they were going to Wembley for an FA Cup semi-final. Draws in the Premier League, but beating Norwich in the FA Cup semi-final. They're going to the FA Cup final, and another place in Europe is on offer so long as the league permutations work out. And in the final, beaten 3-1 by Man United. That would have been their biggest trophy in their history had they won that final, but they failed to do so, and it's another season without a piece of silverware. But I think it means they got into Europe the following year, or for this season, but they actually haven't. So it'd be interesting to see why they haven't managed to qualify for the Europa League this season. And as you can see, they did fail the financial fair play regulations in 2045, but there's no notification as to why they failed to qualify for Europe this time around, which is quite interesting. Despite actually failing the financial play regulations here, they still managed to qualify for Europe that season. So this is making very little sense whatsoever. Maybe it's to do with other teams qualifying, but it doesn't look like it from the league table. So very, very interesting. It could also be that the English footballers dropped down the rankings to a point where they can't send so many teams to Europe, but it's still very surprising they didn't get into Europe this year. Now back to the transfer history screen. You can see after we gave them all of that money and reputation, they spent nearly £300 million in the first year. The following year they spent another £232 million, meaning they have cleared over £500 million in transfers in 2 years, and yet they are not progressing in the league. And they signed some big players here as well. Nearly £35 million on a player from Sporting, the same on someone from Spurs, £27 million on someone from Real Madrid, £26 million from Southampton and from Liverpool, £24 million from Middlesbrough, for very little money coming in. The following year they still managed to splash another £50 million despite that massive transfer outlay, but no surprise they failed financial fair play, leading to a transfer embargo the following season. And this season they're finally able to spend money again, another 70 million being splashed on players. And when we look at their club details, you can see the reputation still up at 8,000, which is quite high, but their bank balance has really dropped down. 176 million, still a lot of money. I'm not going to give them any more money right now because they've spent over £500 million on players, and that is outrageous that they haven't managed to get into the top 10 of the Premier League. So we'll go forward 5 years for what I think will be the very last time and see if they can finally put that money to good use. They've still got over £170 million. If they can finally spend that money and crack the top 4 at least of the Premier League. Well, you can see on the screen they did have an upturn after we left off last time. We left them in the 47-48 season, and since then they've managed to get the 16th place finish, followed by a 12th place one, a 7th place one, and another 7th place one, and then finished 9th, I think, this season. So definitely getting a little bit better, but given how much money they've spent, really not doing the job. I'm not going to spend too long going through the schedule for these. We mostly want to look at the European positions, and if we drop back to where we left off last time, which I think was maybe the year after this. I think this was the season we left off with their terrible start to the year. Really struggling all season. No wonder they finished down in 16th place and not a single bit of cup run there. Just the third round of the Carabao Cup. The following year they had a better start to the season, but still struggling in the cups, knocked out in the FA Cup in the 4th round, and a poor finish to the season. The year after that, again in the FA Cup, managing to get a win in the 3rd round before being knocked out. They managed to make it to the Carabao Cup quarter-finals, but were beaten 2-0 by Manchester City, a little bit unsurprisingly. The following year, a much better season on their cards here, and because they finished 7th, they were in the Europa League. Managed to get through the qualifying rounds into the group stage, where they played Hapoel, I'm butchering that, I'm sure, Nice, where there was a 2-2 draw, and Fenerbahce, where they won 1-0 away. Progressing in the Carabao Cup as well to the 5th round. More wins in the Europa League there, through in the quarter-finals of the Carabao Cup, a 3-1 win there. Replay in the FA Cup, 2-2 draw, lost the first leg to Leicester in the Carabao Cup, but won the second leg 3-1, so it's another Carabao Cup final, and through in the replay as well. Another replay there, knocked out by Leicester, but they did lose the Carabao Cup final 2-1 to Spurs, and that's after getting through in the Europa League knockout stages, 3-1 home and away against PSV. So still another cup competition there, but finally knocked out by Benfica in the second round. I mean, Benfica are always a strong team in Football Manager because of their work permit situation and being able to just take players from South America at will. And they've put an end to Boston's run there in the Europa League. Another good year for the club, though. The following season, they had another Europa League campaign. This is the current season. So we're really hoping that they've won this competition, because it's the only way that they can possibly give us any hope of ever improving. They went out of the Carabao Cup pretty early on. Nice in their group stage again, Villarreal in there, and Randers FC, whoever they are. Something Scandinavian, I would imagine. And they did manage to get through in the group stage on the evidence there. Their league form struggling a little bit, but through in the FA Cup, both the third and the fourth round. And then through against Ghent in the first knockout round, 6-1 on aggregate there. Through in the FA Cup as well. Through against AC Milan, 4-0 on aggregate. That is a famous couple of nights in Boston's history, making the quarterfinals once more, but knocked out by Middlesbrough in the FA Cup quarterfinals. And then through against Napoli in the quarterfinals of the Europa League. They made it all the way to the semi-finals. An excellent win there, 5-0, taking out two Italian teams on their way. And then Crystal Palace, of all teams, in the Europa League semi-final. Surely they're getting through there. A 2-2 draw at home, followed up by a 3-0 defeat away from home. That was the best chance they were ever going to get of winning a major European competition. But they have failed to do so. And when we have a look at the Europa League for this season, you can see Crystal Palace actually beat Borussia Dortmund to win the Europa League and book their place in the Champions League. Crystal Palace seem like they've had a decent time in this save here. They've actually won it before as well, back in 47-48. A lot of English teams. And again in 38-39. Crystal Palace doing exceptionally in the game here. But it means Boston have finished with absolutely nothing. When we have a look at their club details, you can see reputation still at 8,000. Finances, still quite a bit of money there actually. That's £751 million. I think I did give them another billion. Actually, when thinking back on it, I gave them another billion and I put their reputation back up to 10,000 before going forward another 5 years, and they still achieved absolutely nothing. I mean, if you ever wanted a reason to pump, or you ever wanted a way to pump money down the drain, this is definitely the way to do it. Now, facilities all looking pretty good though. The stadium's not too bad either, but they just are not able to progress. And I think this is maybe a reflection in the game of the lack of value in money in football at the moment. When you've got clubs spending £200 million on one player, suddenly spending £500 million seems like small change when you're trying to get up the leagues, especially in a league like the Premier League. And when we look at their transfer history, you can see again a huge outflow that season, but the year before, massive expenditure. The year before, 220 million again. The year before, 15, 215 before that, 84 before that, and then you're back to the transfer embargo. So they spent, since being in the Premier League, easily, I would say, £1 billion on players, and yet they're not even in the Champions League. Last season, it was very easy for FC United and Manchester to make it all the way to the Champions League and win it in the same time we've given Boston. I think they even did it in less time than Boston have had. So it's got to be a reflection of the game's mechanics for how little emphasis the money has in the game, and instead it must be other factors that decide why clubs like Crystal Palace can win the Europa League. But maybe you can let me know your theories down below in the comment section as to why all of this money has done nothing. That's £5 billion, I think, that I've put into this club, and they haven't spent any of it well. It's really, really disappointing. But do let me know in the comments what you think about that, and also drop a like on the video if you do want to see one last desperate attempt of them doing well. Do drop a like on the video, and maybe we could put another part out in a couple of days time, but I'm really, really not sure it will make any difference. There will be a new experiment coming up soon. I'll let you know about that when I've got the idea in mind. Make sure you do subscribe to the channel as well if you're new here. There are always experiments on the channel every 2 days unless something comes up, but I will always get new experiments and new content out. But until next time, see ya.